It's 1968. A young actress steps onto the set of Star Trek, expecting a career milestone. Instead, she's confronted with a wardrobe demand from the show's own creator, one that allegedly pushed her past her breaking point. What followed was, according to some accounts, a tense on-set clash that halted filming and left a story fans still argue about today. Was it a genuine violation or an exaggerated bit of set gossip? To understand what supposedly happened, we need to rewind and look at how she ended up there in the first place. Before diving into the drama, it helps to set the scene because the context shapes everything. In 1968, Teri Garr was still an up-and-coming performer, years away from becoming the actress audiences would later recognize from films like Young Frankenstein and Tootsie, roles that eventually earned her an Oscar nomination and cemented her as a Hollywood name. At this point in her career, though, she was doing what most young actresses in town did, taking guest spots, building a resume, and hoping one part would open bigger doors. Star Trek. The original series was one of the stops along that path. Interestingly, this wasn't her first time on the show. She'd already had a smaller, background-type appearance earlier in the series before landing the role central to this story, meaning she wasn't stepping onto an unfamiliar set. She already had some sense of the crew, the rhythm of production, and how things generally work there. That familiarity is part of what makes the incident that follows so unexpected. This wasn't a case of a newcomer misreading an unfamiliar environment. The episode in question, Assignment, Earth, carried extra weight behind the scenes. It wasn't a standalone adventure. It was designed as a backdoor pilot. Gene Roddenberry hoped to launch an entirely new series from it, built around a mysterious secret agent named Gary Seven. Garr was cast as his assistant, Roberta Lincoln. Being cast as a secretary in a late 1960s sci-fi show came with predictable wardrobe expectations. Star Trek had already built a reputation for bold, tight, and notably short costuming for its female characters, a signature look that regularly tested the limits of what network censors would allow. Garr's costume as Roberta Lincoln followed that pattern. Already a short skirt, already toward the edge of what the show typically got away with. She arrived prepared, lines memorized, ready to shoot her first scene in a role that could have launched a spin-off series. Then things took an unexpected turn. Right before filming began, the skirt, already short by any standard, became a last-minute issue, not because of a script change or a routine note passed through wardrobe channels, but because Gene Roddenberry himself decided personally that it needed to be shorter still. According to Lance Parkin's biography of Roddenberry, the impossible has happened, the life and work of Gene Roddenberry. The request wasn't small. Roddenberry reportedly pushed costume designer William Ware Tice, already known throughout the production for daring, boundary-pushing outfits, to trim roughly 2 more inches off the hem, on a garment already sitting near the edge of what 1968 television allowed. That was a significant last-minute change, not a subtle tweak. The account goes further. Rather than relaying the request through wardrobe, Roddenberry allegedly knelt down in front of Garr himself and began rolling up the hem by hand. Not off to the side, not through an assistant, but directly on an active set with cast and crew present and cameras being prepped. Picture that moment. A relatively young actress on a major show in a role that could launch a new series, with the creator and head of the entire production kneeling in front of her and physically adjusting her clothing before her first scene, all in view of colleagues. According to Parkin's account, Garr found the interaction deeply humiliating. The story holds that she was so upset she walked off the set entirely, right there, in direct response to what had happened. If accurate, it wasn't merely a costume disagreement. It was a public, physically intrusive moment involving one of the most powerful people on the production. Even without a shouting match, an experience like that could easily leave someone feeling exposed and disrespected in front of peers. That's the version that has circulated widely, the dramatic walk-off, retold across fan forums, Star Trek behind-the-scenes videos, and gossip roundup for years. It's become something close to accepted lore. But not everyone who was actually present remembers it the same way. Robert H. Justman, the show's assistant director, was actually on set that day, not reconstructing events decades later from secondhand sources, but running production in real time. In his own memoir, Inside Star Trek, The Real Story, his recollection of the moment is notably more restrained. Justman describes Garr as someone who understood the machinations of show business, his interpretation being that she recognized this as simply part of how the industry operated and didn't visibly object while Roddenberry adjusted the costume. In his telling, there was no walk-off, no protest, no dramatic exit. But even in this calmer version, Justman notes something important. Garr looked embarrassed when called to set. So even the account that downplays a confrontation still includes a clear admission. She was visibly uncomfortable in front of the entire crew. That leaves two differing memories of the same afternoon. One, the more widely repeated version, describes an actress dramatically walking off in protest. The other, from someone actually directing the scene, describes a more subdued reaction, but one that still involved visible discomfort and humiliation. Both versions agree that something about the interaction was far from routine. It's worth remembering how differently these two sources were produced. Parkin was writing a research biography years after the fact, piecing together interviews and existing accounts. Justman was present in the room, but he too was writing decades later, in a memoir shaped by his own perspective and likely some instinct to present the production in a favorable light. What both accounts agree on, Garr finished shooting the episode. Whatever happened in that specific moment. Filming continued, and Roberta Lincoln exists on screen in assignment, Earth Today. And regardless of which version is more accurate, both leave her with what appears to be a lasting negative impression of the experience. There's an argument that the more boring version, the one without a dramatic exit, is actually the more damning one, because even without a walkout, it still ends with a young actress standing on set, visibly embarrassed in front of her colleagues, over a decision made without her input. Whatever exactly occurred that day, what happened afterward speaks volumes. Teri Garr rarely, if ever, spoke about her time on Star Trek again. In an interview with Starlog, a magazine catering specifically to sci-fi fans, where actors typically reminisce fondly about beloved genre roles, she was asked about her Star Trek appearance. Her response was blunt. She said she'd done it years earlier and mostly denied it had ever happened. That's a striking thing to say about a role on one of the most iconic franchises in.